The needle slipped through wool for the 100th time that morning, and Sarah Steele wondered if her fingers would ever stop aching long enough for her to feel human again. It was 1878 in Placitas, New Mexico territory, and the August heat made even the shaded corner of the general store's porch feel like standing inside an oven. Sarah had claimed this spot 3 months ago, right after her father died from pneumonia and left her with nothing but debts and a trunk full of his old clothes. The store owner, Mr. Henderson, let her sit here because she drove away flies with her constant movement, and occasionally a customer would wander over to see what she was doing. Sometimes they even paid her to mend their worn items. Today, she had already darned 4 pairs of socks for various miners and ranch hands, earning herself 20 cents. If she was lucky, she might make 50 cents by sundown, enough for a bowl of soup and a corner in the boarding house's storage room where Mrs. Chen let her sleep on a pile of empty flour sacks. It was not the life Sarah had imagined when she was 16, but at 22, she had learned that imagination and reality rarely shook hands in this territory. The sun climbed higher, and Sarah wiped sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand, careful not to drop the sock she was working on. This one belonged to a freight driver who had promised her 10 cents if she could make it last another month. The heel was nearly worn through, and she was essentially rebuilding it with scraps of yarn she had salvaged from an old sweater. She heard boots on the wooden planks before she saw him. Heavy, confident steps that spoke of a man who knew where he was going and did not apologize for the space he took up in the world. Sarah kept her eyes on her work, though she was aware of him stopping a few feet away. Most men who approached either wanted to know her prices or wanted to offer her a different kind of work entirely, and she had become skilled at discouraging the latter without causing offense. "You are good at that," the man said. His voice was deep, rough around the edges like wind over canyon rocks, but there was something gentle underneath it. "Practice," Sarah replied, still not looking up. "Did you need something mended? I've got a pair of socks that have more hole than sock at this point." He moved closer, and Sarah caught sight of dusty brown boots, worn but well-maintained. "Been meaning to throw them out, but they are the most comfortable pair I have ever owned." "Comfort is worth saving," Sarah said, finishing her current stitch and finally looking up. The man standing before her was tall, probably in his mid-20s, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of good whiskey. His face was tanned from long days in the sun, and he had the lean, muscled build of someone who worked with cattle or horses. He wore a faded blue shirt, dark trousers, and a gun belt that sat easy on his hips like it belonged there. But what struck Sarah most was his expression, open and genuinely curious rather than calculating. "How much do you charge?" he asked. "Depends on the damage." 5 cents for basic darning, more if I have to rebuild the whole thing." He nodded slowly, then glanced down the street toward the small restaurant that served as Placidas's only real dining establishment. "Here is my offer," he said. "You darn my socks, make them comfortable again, and I will pay you with supper. A real meal, not just soup. Whatever you want from Maria's place." Sarah's stomach chose that moment to remind her that she had not eaten anything since yesterday's breakfast, a piece of dry bread and some water. But she had learned to be cautious about offers that seemed too generous. "That is more than fair for a simple darning job. What is the catch?" "No catch." He smiled, and it transformed his whole face, made him look younger and more approachable. "I just figure you have been sitting in this heat all day, and a hot meal seems like decent payment for decent work. My name is Robert O'Brien, but most people call me Rob. Sarah Steele." She hesitated only a moment before adding, "I accept your offer, Mr. O'Brien." but I will need to see the socks first to make sure I can actually save them. They are back at the boarding house, Rob said. I am staying there while I work at the Jackson Ranch. Been helping them break horses for the past few weeks. I could bring them by tomorrow morning if that works for you. That will be fine. Rob tipped his hat to her, that easy smile still in place. I will see you tomorrow then, Miss Steele, and I promise those socks are worth your expertise. After he left, Sarah tried to focus on the freight driver's sock, but her mind kept drifting back to the cowboy with the kind eyes. She told herself it was just because she was looking forward to a proper meal. But that night in her corner of the storage room, she found herself wondering what Robert O'Brien's story was, and why a man who could obviously afford a decent meal would offer one to a stranger in exchange for darning. The next morning arrived with the same oppressive heat, though the early hours before the sun got too high were almost pleasant. Sarah had already taken her spot on the porch when Rob appeared, right around 7. He held a pair of gray wool socks that looked like they had been through a war and lost. I warned you, he said, handing them over with an apologetic shrug. Sarah examined them carefully. The heels were completely worn through, and there were thin spots all along the bottom and toes. But the wool itself was high quality, soft and thick, the kind that would last for years if properly maintained. These are good socks, she said. Where did you get them? My mother made them before I left home. That was 5 years ago. There was something in his voice, a note of longing mixed with resignation. I have tried buying new ones, but nothing feels quite the same. Sarah understood immediately. These were not just socks. They were a connection to someone he loved, a tangible piece of home in a territory where everything was harsh and uncertain. I can save them, she said firmly. It will take me most of the day, but I can rebuild the heels and reinforce the thin spots. They will be good for another year at least. Relief washed over Rob's face. Thank you, really. Should I come by this evening then, suppertime? Sarah agreed. And Mr. O'Brien, I will do my best work on these, I promise. I believe you. He started to walk away, then turned back. And please call me Rob. Mr. O'Brien makes me feel like I should be wearing a suit and working in a bank. Sarah allowed herself a small smile. Rob then, and you can call me Sarah. After he left, she set aside her other projects and focused entirely on the gray wool socks. She had not lied when she said it would take most of the day. First, she had to carefully unravel the damaged portions, salvaging every bit of usable yarn. Then she needed to find matching wool to fill in the gaps. Mr. Henderson let her dig through his scrap bin, and she found some gray yarn that was close enough in color and texture to work. As her needle moved in and out, creating new fabric where there had been only holes, Sarah found herself thinking about the woman who had made these socks. Rob's mother must have spent hours crafting them, putting love into every stitch, knowing her son would be walking far from home. Sarah wondered if the woman was still alive, if she knew how much her boy treasured her gift. The sun tracked across the sky, and Sarah's usual customers came and went. She took brief breaks to accept new projects and collect payment for completed ones, but she kept returning to the gray socks. By late afternoon, her back ached from bending over her work, and her eyes were tired from the close focus, but the socks were nearly done. She was adding the final reinforcement stitches when Rob appeared again, earlier than she had expected. The sun was still a couple of hours from setting, and he looked like he had just washed up, his hair damp and his shirt clean. I know I am early, he said, but I finished up at the ranch sooner than expected, and I thought maybe we could eat before the restaurant gets too crowded. If you are done, that is. If not, I can wait. Sarah tied off her last stitch and bit the thread, then held up the completed socks. Perfect timing. Rob took them almost reverently, running his fingers over the rebuilt heels. "These look better than when they were new. You really are skilled at this." "I've had a lot of practice in the past few months." Sarah gathered her supplies and stored them in the small basket she kept by her chair. "Give me just a moment to let Mr. Henderson know I am leaving." She ducked inside the store, informed the owner she would be back tomorrow morning, and then rejoined Rob on the porch. He offered her his arm in a gesture that seemed old-fashioned and sweet, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. They walked down the dusty main street toward Maria's restaurant, and Sarah was acutely aware of the stares they attracted. Placida's was a small town, barely more than a few dozen buildings clustered around a crossroads, and everyone knew she was the poor girl who darned socks on the general store porch. Being seen walking arm in arm with a relatively prosperous cowboy would generate gossip, but Sarah found she did not care as much as she probably should. Maria's restaurant occupied the ground floor of a two-story adobe building. The interior was dim and cool, a welcome relief from the heat outside, and the smell of cooking meat and spices made Sarah's mouth water. Maria herself, a stout woman in her 50s with iron-gray hair, looked up from the stove and smiled. "Robert," she said warmly, "and you have brought a guest. Welcome, both of you." They settled at a small table near the window, and Maria brought them glasses of cool water without being asked. "The special tonight is beef stew with fresh bread," she announced, "and I have apple pie for dessert." "Two of the special, please," Rob said. "And 2 slices of pie." After Maria retreated to her kitchen, silence fell between them, the comfortable kind that did not need to be filled with meaningless chatter. Sarah sipped her water and looked out the window at the town settling into evening. "How long have you been in Placida's?" Rob asked eventually. "I was born here," Sarah said. "My father was a carpenter. He built half the houses in this town." She paused, decided he had been kind enough to earn honesty. "He died 3 months ago, pneumonia." He had been in debt, trying to help people who could not always pay him, so when he passed, there was nothing left. "I sold everything to settle what he owed, and then I needed to figure out how to survive." "I am sorry about your father." Rob's voice held genuine sympathy. "It sounds like he was a good man." "He was, too good, maybe. He never could turn away someone who needed help, even if it meant we went without." Sarah smiled despite the ache in her chest. "But I cannot fault him for that. It is who he was." Maria appeared with 2 steaming bowls of stew and a basket of bread so fresh it was still warm. Sarah forced herself to eat slowly, to savor each bite rather than wolfing it down like her empty stomach demanded. The beef was tender, the vegetables perfectly cooked, and the broth rich with flavor. It was the best meal she had eaten in months, possibly years. "What about you?" she asked between bites. "You said you left home 5 years ago. Where was that?" "Montana Territory. My family has a small ranch up there, cattle mostly." Rob tore off a piece of bread and dipped it in his stew. "I am the youngest of 4 boys. My brothers all stayed to help run the place, but I wanted to see more of the territory, learn different ways of doing things. So I have been drifting south, working ranches from Montana down through Wyoming and Colorado, and now here." "You miss it." "Your family's ranch. Every day," Rob admitted. "But I also know I was not ready to settle in one place when I left. I needed to figure out who I was separate from being the youngest O'Brien boy." "Does that make sense?" It did, more than Sarah wanted to admit. She had spent her whole life being John Steele's daughter, the carpenter's girl, and now she was just the woman who darned socks. Sometimes she wondered if she would ever be anything else. They talked through the rest of dinner, easy conversation that flowed naturally from topic to topic. Rob told her about the horses he had been breaking at the Jackson Ranch, how each one had its own personality and quirks. Sarah told him about some of her more interesting customers, like the prospector who had paid her with a small gold nugget to repair his only pair of pants, or the traveling preacher who had tried to pay with prayers until she firmly insisted on actual coins. The pie arrived, and it was everything Maria's cooking promised. Sweet apples with cinnamon, wrapped in a flaky crust that melted on the tongue. Sarah made it last as long as possible, knowing that tomorrow she would be back to whatever cheap food she could afford. "Thank you for this," she said when they were finally done. "It has been a while since I have had a meal like that." "Thank you for saving my socks," Rob replied, "and for the company. I have been in Placitas for 3 weeks now, and most nights I just eat alone and head to bed." This was much better. They left the restaurant as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Rob walked Sarah back to the boarding house, and she felt an odd disappointment that the evening was ending. It had been nice to talk to someone, to feel like a normal person having dinner rather than a charity case scraping by. At the boarding house door, Rob turned to her. "I am at the ranch most days, but I come into town on Sundays. Would you maybe want to have dinner again?" "Same arrangement. You can mend something for me in exchange." Sarah knew she should say no. Getting attached to a cowboy who would eventually drift on to the next town was foolish, and she could not afford foolishness. But his eyes were so hopeful, and the memory of that meal was so warm that she found herself nodding. "I would like that." His smile was like sunrise. "Good. I will see you Sunday then." She watched him walk away, his figure disappearing into the gathering darkness, and then she made her way around to the back entrance that led to the storage room. Mrs. Chen was in the kitchen, preparing the next day's breakfast for the boarders, and she looked up as Sarah entered. "You were late tonight," the older woman observed in her accented English. "I had dinner with someone, a customer who paid for mending with a meal." Mrs. Chen's sharp eyes studied her face. "A man, I think. Be careful, Sarah. Hearts are harder to mend than socks." "It is just dinner," Sarah protested. But Mrs. Chen had already turned back to her work, and Sarah made her way to her corner of the storage room. That night, lying on her pile of flour sacks, Sarah could still taste the apple pie and feel the warmth of Rob's arm under her hand. She told herself it meant nothing, that it was just a kind gesture from a decent person. But as she drifted off to sleep, she found herself counting the days until Sunday. The week passed slowly. Sarah darned socks and mended shirts, patched trousers and reinforced coat seams. She made enough money to eat once a day and keep her spot in the storage room, but everything felt gray and monotonous. Even her regular customers seemed duller than usual, their demands and complaints wearing on her patience. On Saturday evening, Sarah used a precious nickel to buy soap and paid Mrs. Chen another nickel to heat water for a proper bath. She washed her hair and scrubbed away the accumulated dust and sweat, then sat in the kitchen while her hair dried, helping Mrs. Chen shell peas for Sunday dinner. "You are making yourself pretty for this man," Mrs. Chen said. "It was not a question. I am just cleaning up. I would do this anyway. Hum." Mrs. Chen's expression was skeptical but not unkind. "Just remember, pretty words and warm meals do not always mean a warm heart. Watch how he treats others, not just you." Sarah nodded, taking the advice seriously. Mrs. Chen had lived through more than Sarah could imagine, had traveled from China to California, and then inland to New Mexico territory after her husband died in the gold fields. If anyone understood the dangers of trusting too quickly, it was her. Sunday morning arrived with clouds that promised rain, a rare blessing in the August heat. Sarah put on her best dress, a simple blue cotton that had been her mother's. It was faded and slightly too large, but it was clean and had no visible patches. She braided her hair, pinned it up, and then took her usual spot on the general store porch, even though she knew the store would be closed for the day. Rob appeared around noon, wearing clean clothes and that same open expression that made her heart do strange things. "I was hoping you would still be here," he said. "I thought maybe we could walk a bit before dinner if you would like. There is a pretty spot up by the creek." "I would like that," Sarah said, setting aside the sock she had been working on purely to keep her hands busy. They walked through town and out onto a narrow path that led toward the creek bed. Even with the drought, there was still some water flowing and cottonwood trees provided shade along the banks. Rob led her to a flat rock overlooking a deeper pool where water collected, and they sat side by side, their shoulders nearly touching. "I've been looking forward to this all week," Rob said quietly. "Is that strange? We barely know each other." "If it is strange, then we are both strange," Sarah replied. "I kept thinking about what we might talk about." "I want to know everything about you," Rob said. "What do you like to do when you are not mending clothes? What makes you happy?" Sarah had to think about that. It had been so long since she had done anything purely for enjoyment. "I used to read," she said finally. "My mother taught me before she died, and I used to borrow books from the minister's wife. I like stories about faraway places, adventures and mysteries. But I sold all my books after my father died, and I have not had time or energy for reading since then." "What else?" "I used to help my father with his carpentry sometimes. I was not strong enough for the heavy work, but I could do detail carving, make decorative pieces for furniture. I enjoyed that, creating something beautiful." She looked down at her hands, calloused and stained with yarn dye. "Seems like a lifetime ago." Rob was quiet for a moment, and when Sarah glanced at him, she found him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You are not just surviving," he said. "You are someone with dreams and talents that go way beyond what you are doing now. You know that, right? Dreams do not pay for food or shelter," Sarah said, but her voice was softer than she intended. "No, but they are what make life worth living." Rob picked up a small stone and tossed it into the water, watching the ripples spread. "I think that is why I left Montana. I could have stayed and been comfortable, but I would have always wondered what else was out there. Sometimes I think I am still looking for whatever it is that will make me want to stop drifting." "Have you found it?" He turned to look at her again, and there was something in his eyes that made Sarah's heart race. "Maybe I am starting to." They sat in silence for a while, watching the water and listening to the wind in the cottonwood leaves. The clouds overhead grew darker, and the first drops of rain began to fall, fat and cool on their sun-warmed skin. "We should get back before it really starts coming down," Rob said, standing and offering his hand to help Sarah up. They made it halfway back to town before the sky opened up completely, drenching them in seconds. Sarah gasped at the shock of cold water, and then she was laughing, unable to help herself. It felt good to be washed clean, to feel something other than heat and dust. Rob laughed too, and they ran the rest of the way to Maria's restaurant, arriving breathless and soaked. Maria took one look at them and shook her head, but she was smiling. "You two are dripping all over my floor. Go sit by the stove and dry out. I will bring you something hot to drink." They sat near the cast iron stove, steam rising from their wet clothes, and Maria brought them coffee and thick slices of bread with butter. The restaurant was empty except for them, most people staying home to wait out the storm. "I must look a mess," Sarah said, trying to tuck loose strands of wet hair back into her braid. "You look beautiful," Rob said simply, and the sincerity in his voice made Sarah stop fidgeting and just look at him. "You barely know me," she whispered. "I know enough." I know you are strong and skilled and resourceful. I know you honor your commitments and care about doing good work. I know you have been through hard times, but you have not let them make you bitter." He reached across the table and took her hand, his fingers warm around hers. "And I know I would like to keep seeing you, if you will let me." Sarah should have been cautious. She should have remembered that cowboys were drifters, that Rob would move on eventually, that letting herself care would only lead to heartbreak. But his hand felt so right in hers, and his eyes held such honest affection that she could not bring herself to pull away. "I would like that too," she said. They had dinner again, and this time when Rob walked her back to the boarding house, he kissed her cheek gently before saying good night. It was chaste and respectful, but Sarah felt the touch of his lips all the way down to her toes. After that, Sunday dinners became a regular thing, and Rob started finding reasons to come into town on other days too. He would bring her things he needed mended, though Sarah suspected he was sometimes creating damage just to have an excuse to see her. She did not mind. Each visit, each conversation, they learned more about each other, and the connection between them grew stronger. Rob told her about his family's ranch, about his mother who loved to sing while she cooked, and his father who could calm any horse with just his voice. He told her about his brothers, about growing up in Montana's harsh winters, about the year they almost lost everything to a blizzard. Sarah told him about her mother, who had died when Sarah was 12, about learning to keep house for her father, about the careful budgeting and endless work that had defined her teenage years. 6 weeks after their first dinner, Rob came to find Sarah on the general store porch with an unusual request. "The Jackson Ranch is having a barn dance next Saturday," he said. "All the ranch hands and their families are invited, plus anyone from town who wants to come. Would you go with me?" "I do not know how to dance," Sarah admitted, "and I do not have anything appropriate to wear." "I will teach you to dance," Rob said immediately. "As for a dress, would you let me buy you one? I know you are proud and do not like charity, but please consider it a gift, not charity. I want to see you there, and I want you to feel comfortable." Sarah wanted to refuse on principle, but the idea of going to a dance, of wearing a pretty dress and spending an evening with Rob doing something other than just eating dinner was too tempting. "A simple dress," she said. "Nothing fancy." Rob's smile could have lit the whole territory. "I promise. Simple but nice." They went to the general store together, and Mr. Henderson brought out the few dresses he kept in stock. Most were practical calico or cotton in dark colors, but there was one that made Sarah catch her breath. It was a soft green, the color of new leaves in spring, with a modest neckline and simple lines that would suit her figure. Rob saw her looking at it and immediately told Mr. Henderson to wrap it up. "It is too much," Sarah protested. "It is perfect," Rob countered. "And you deserve something nice, Sarah. Please." She gave in, letting herself imagine how it would feel to wear something pretty again, to be more than just the girl who darned socks. The days leading up to the dance, Rob taught her basic steps in the quiet space behind the general store. He was patient when she stumbled, encouraging when she got discouraged, and always respectful even as they moved closer together than propriety usually allowed. By Saturday, Sarah felt reasonably confident she could make it through at least a few dances without embarrassing herself. Mrs. Chen helped her get ready, arranging her hair in a style that was both practical and pretty, pinning it up with small flowers she had somehow procured. When Sarah looked at herself in the small mirror Mrs. Chen provided, she barely recognized the woman looking back. She looked young and hopeful, the way she used to look before her father died, and the weight of survival settled on her shoulders. Rob arrived at sunset, driving a wagon borrowed from the ranch. His eyes went wide when he saw her, and he actually stumbled over his words trying to tell her how beautiful she looked. Sarah felt her cheeks warm, but she was smiling as he helped her up onto the wagon seat. The ride to the Jackson Ranch took about half an hour, and the whole way, Sarah felt giddy with anticipation. She had been to barn dances before, years ago when her father was alive and things were easier, but this felt different. This felt like stepping into a new life. The ranch yard was already full of wagons and horses when they arrived. The barn had been cleared out and decorated with lanterns, and someone had set up a small platform for the musicians. People milled around, talking and laughing, and Sarah recognized several faces from town. A few women gave her curious looks, probably wondering how the sock-darning girl had ended up with one of the more eligible cowboys. But Sarah held her head high and stayed close to Rob. The music started, and Rob led her onto the dance floor. The first few steps were awkward, Sarah too conscious of all the people watching, but then she focused on Rob's face and the way he was looking at her like she was the only person in the world. She relaxed, let the music guide her movements, and suddenly she was actually dancing. They spun around the floor, and Sarah felt lighter than she had in years. Rob was a good dancer, confident but not showy, and he kept her close enough that she felt safe but not so close as to attract scandal. Between dances, he brought her punch and introduced her to people from the ranch, always presenting her as his special guest. Halfway through the evening, the ranch owner, Mr. Jackson, announced that they would be hiring more hands for the fall roundup and possibly keeping some on through winter. "We have had a good year," he said, "and we are expanding our operations. If anyone is interested, see me tomorrow." Sarah felt Rob tense beside her, and when she looked at him questioningly, he leaned close to whisper, "That means I could stay, if I wanted to." Winter work is rare, and the Jackson Ranch is one of the best places to work in this territory. "Do you want to stay?" Sarah asked, her heart suddenly pounding. "That depends," Rob said, taking her hand. "Let us go somewhere we can talk." He led her out of the barn and around to a quieter spot where they could still hear the music but were away from the crowd. The moon was nearly full, casting silver light over everything, and the air had finally cooled to something comfortable. "Sarah," Rob began, then stopped and took a breath like he was steeling himself for something difficult. "I know we have only known each other for 2 months. I know that is not very long, and maybe I should wait longer before saying this, but I do not want to wait. I do not want to lose you because I was too cautious or too worried about doing things the proper way." "What are you saying?" Sarah's voice came out barely above a whisper. "I am saying I have fallen in love with you." Rob took both her hands in his. "I am saying that for the first time in 5 years of drifting, I want to stop. I want to stay in one place, build a life, put down roots. And I want to do all of that with you." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but they were good tears, happy tears. "Rob, I have been so scared to let myself feel this way because I knew you would leave eventually. I thought I was just making things harder for myself." "I do not want to leave," Rob said firmly. "Not unless you come with me." "Sarah Steele, I know this is fast, and I know I should probably court you properly for a year or more before asking, but life is uncertain out here, and I would rather be honest about what I want. I want a future with you. I want to marry you if you will have me." "Yes," Sarah said, the word tumbling out before she could overthink it. "Yes, I will have you. I will marry you. I love you too." Rob pulled her close and kissed her, properly this time, and Sarah felt like her heart might burst from happiness. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and grinning, Rob rested his forehead against hers. "I am going to take that winter job," he said. "And I am going to save every penny I can so we can get married properly and start a life together." I am going to work so hard and make sure you never have to sit on that porch darning socks for coins ever again." "I do not mind working," Sarah said, "but I would not mind working alongside you instead of alone." They stayed outside talking and planning for another hour, dreaming about their future together. Rob wanted to eventually have his own small ranch, maybe just a few head of cattle and some horses. Sarah wanted a real house, something her father would have been proud to build, with windows that let in lots of light and a garden where she could grow vegetables. They both wanted children, though they agreed to wait a bit until they were more established. When they finally returned to the barn, Maria spotted them and immediately pulled Sarah aside. "You look like a woman in love," she said with a knowing smile. "I am," Sarah admitted. "He asked me to marry him." Maria hugged her tightly. "I am happy for you. Robert is a good man. I can see it in how he treats people, how he works. You chose well." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of dancing and congratulations as word spread about their engagement. Some people seemed surprised, but most were genuinely happy for them. Even Mr. Henderson, who had let Sarah sit on his porch all these months, came over to offer his best wishes. As Rob drove Sarah back to town, she leaned against his shoulder and looked up at the stars. "How did this happen?" she murmured. "2 months ago I was barely surviving, and now I am engaged to the most wonderful man I have ever met." "You darned my socks," Rob said simply, "and I paid with supper." Sometimes the smallest moments lead to the biggest changes. They were married on a Sunday afternoon in late October, just as the weather was starting to turn cool. It was a simple ceremony in the small church, with Maria and Mrs. Chen standing as witnesses and most of the town in attendance. Sarah wore a cream-colored dress that Rob had insisted on buying, and she carried wildflowers that some of the ranch hands had picked that morning. Rob wore a new shirt and had gotten a proper haircut, and when Sarah walked down the aisle toward him, the look on his face made her feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. They spoke their vows in clear, steady voices, promising to love and cherish each other through whatever hardships and joys lay ahead. The reception was held at Maria's restaurant, which she had closed for the afternoon, so they could have the whole space. There was food and music, and people danced and celebrated late into the evening. Mr. Jackson gave them a generous wedding gift, 2 months' wages in advance, which would help them get started on their own place. Rob had already arranged for them to rent a small house on the edge of town, just 2 rooms and a kitchen, but it was theirs. Mrs. Chen had helped Sarah make curtains and gather basic household items. It was not much, but it was a beginning. Their wedding night was tender and sweet, both of them nervous but also eager to finally be truly together. Rob was gentle and patient, making sure Sarah felt loved and cherished, and when they finally fell asleep in each other's arms, Sarah felt more content than she ever had in her life. The first months of marriage brought adjustments, as both of them learned to share space and coordinate their lives. Rob worked long days at the Jackson Ranch, and Sarah continued to take in mending work, though now she could do it from their home rather than the general store porch. The money Rob earned was enough for them to live on, but Sarah liked contributing and keeping busy. By December, Sarah realized she was pregnant. She told Rob on Christmas Eve, giving him a tiny pair of socks she had knitted as a way of sharing the news. He stared at them for a long moment, then looked up at her with tears in his eyes. "We are going to have a baby?" he asked, his voice choked with emotion. "Yes," Sarah said, moving into his arms. "Around July, I think." Rob held her close, and she could feel him trembling with joy. "I am going to be a father," he whispered. "Sarah, I promise I will be the best father I can be. I promise I will work hard and provide for you and our child." "I know you will," Sarah said. You are already the best husband. I have no doubt you will be an amazing father." The next months passed in a flurry of preparation. Rob worked extra hours whenever he could, determined to save enough money to buy their own land. Sarah sewed baby clothes and gathered supplies, accepting hand-me-downs from women in town with older children. Her belly grew steadily, and Rob would spend evenings with his hand on her stomach, marveling every time the baby kicked. In late March, Mr. Jackson called Rob into his office with surprising news. "I have been impressed with your work," the ranch owner said. "And I know you are looking to start your own place eventually. I have a proposition for you." Rob listened as Mr. Jackson explained that there was a small piece of land on the far edge of the ranch property, about 40 acres, that was not particularly useful for the main cattle operation, but would be perfect for a small homestead. "I will sell it to you for a fair price," Mr. Jackson said, "and I will even extend you credit, let you pay it off over the next 5 years. In exchange, you would continue working for me part-time and help out when we need extra hands during busy seasons." It was more than Rob had dared hope for. He accepted immediately and rushed home to tell Sarah. They rode out to look at the land the next day, and Sarah fell in love with it immediately. There was a good spot for a house near a small creek, plenty of grazing land for horses or a few cattle, and even some flat areas that would be perfect for a garden. "We can build here," Rob said, his arm around Sarah's shoulders as they surveyed their future. "We can make a real home, raise our family, maybe even expand someday." "It is perfect," Sarah agreed, and she meant it. This piece of land represented everything they had worked toward, all their dreams coming together in one tangible place. Rob started building their house that spring, working on it every spare moment he had. Some of the other ranch hands helped, and even Mr. Henderson came out a few times to contribute his carpentry skills in honor of Sarah's father. The house went up slowly but steadily, a sturdy wooden structure with 3 rooms and a covered porch. Sarah went into labor on a hot July afternoon, 2 weeks earlier than expected. Mrs. Chen and Maria were both with her, having planned to help with the birth. It was long and difficult, lasting nearly 20 hours, but finally, just after dawn on July 17, 1879, Sarah gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Rob, who had been pacing outside the room for hours, was finally allowed in to meet his son. He approached the bed tentatively, looking down at the tiny red-faced infant in Sarah's arms with absolute wonder. "He is perfect," Rob breathed. "Sarah, you did such an amazing job. He is absolutely perfect." "What should we name him?" Sarah asked, exhausted but happy. They had discussed names but never settled on anything definite. Now, looking at their son, Rob said, "What about John? After your father, he should carry on that legacy." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "John Robert O'Brien," she said. "I love it." Little John was a healthy, hungry baby who kept them both busy and sleep-deprived for the first few months. But even in their exhaustion, Sarah and Rob were happier than they had ever been. Their house on the new land was finished by September, and they moved in just as the weather was starting to cool. The house was small but comfortable, with a bedroom for them, a nursery for John, and a main room that served as kitchen and living space. Rob built furniture in his spare time, including a rocking chair that Sarah used for nursing the baby. They acquired a milk cow and some chickens, and Sarah planted a late-season garden that yielded enough vegetables to help them through the winter. Life settled into a rhythm. Rob worked at the Jackson Ranch 3 days a week, and spent the other days building up their own small herd of cattle and breaking horses to sell. Sarah took care of John and the house, still taking in occasional mending work but only when she felt like it, not because they desperately needed the money. They were not wealthy by any means, but they were comfortable and happy. When John was 18 months old, Sarah discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and in April of 1881 she gave birth to a daughter they named Martha Ellen, after both their mothers. Martha was a calm, sweet-natured baby, very different from her energetic older brother. The years passed, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and raising children. Rob and Sarah slowly expanded their operation, adding more cattle and building a small barn. They hired a young man named Tom to help with the heavier work, and Rob taught him everything he knew about horses. In 1883, their third child arrived, another boy they named James. By then, they had paid off half the debt on their land and were well established in the community. Sarah had long since stopped being known as the girl who darned socks. Now she was Mrs. O'Brien, the wife of that successful young rancher, the mother of those well-behaved children. But sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were asleep, and she and Rob sat together on their porch watching the sunset, Sarah would remember that hot August day on the general store porch when a cowboy had stopped to ask about darning socks. She would remember how hopeless she had felt, how certain she was that her life would never be more than a daily struggle for survival. "What are you thinking about?" Rob would ask, seeing the distant look in her eyes. "Just remembering," Sarah would say. "Remembering how you changed my life with a simple offer of supper in exchange for mending your socks." Rob would pull her close and kiss her temple. "You changed my life too," he would say. "You gave me a reason to stop drifting and start building something real. Everything good I have now, it all started with you." In 1885, when John was 6 and starting to help with simple ranch chores, Mr. Jackson approached Rob with another proposition. He was getting older and wanted to start gradually reducing his workload. He offered to make Rob his foreman, overseeing the daily operations of the ranch, with a significant increase in pay and the understanding that Rob might eventually take over managing the whole operation. It was a huge opportunity, one that would provide financial security for their family and give Rob the chance to use everything he had learned over the years. But it would also mean more time away from their own land, more responsibility, and more time away from Sarah and the children. Rob discussed it with Sarah at length. "I do not want to accept if it is going to put too much burden on you," he said, "or if it means I will miss watching our children grow up." "You should take it," Sarah said firmly. "You have worked so hard for this, and you deserve the recognition. And we are not doing this alone. We have Tom, and I can hire someone to help me with the house and children if needed. This is a good opportunity, Rob. We should take it." So Rob became foreman of the Jackson Ranch, and their financial situation improved considerably. They were able to hire a housekeeper, a young woman named Lucy who helped with cooking and cleaning and watching the children. Sarah found herself with more free time than she had had in years, and she used it to pursue some of the interests she had set aside. She started reading again, borrowing books from the minister's wife, just like she had as a girl. She took up drawing, sketching the landscape around their home and portraits of her children. She even did some decorative wood carving again, creating picture frames and small ornamental boxes that Rob would give as gifts. Their fourth child, a daughter named Rose, was born in 1887. By then, John was 8, Martha was 6, and James was 4. The house felt full and lively, always filled with the sounds of children playing and laughing. Rob had expanded the house, adding 2 more bedrooms and a proper dining room, so they had space for their growing family. In the fall of 1889, Rob's parents made the long journey from Montana to visit. They had not seen each other in nearly 12 years, and the reunion was emotional. Rob's mother, Ellen, was delighted to finally meet her grandchildren, and she spent hours telling them stories about their father as a boy. Rob's father, William, was impressed with what his youngest son had built. "You have done well for yourself," he told Rob as they toured the property. "I am proud of you. I always knew you had it in you to succeed, but I will admit I worried when you left home so young." "I had to find my own way," Rob said, "and I am glad I did because it led me to Sarah." William nodded, glancing over at where Sarah was showing Ellen her garden. "She is a remarkable woman, strong, capable, kind. You chose well, son." The visit lasted 2 weeks, and when Rob's parents finally left to return to Montana, they made Rob and Sarah promise to bring the children north for a visit sometime soon. "We are getting older," Ellen said, hugging each grandchild goodbye. "And we want to know our grandchildren before we are too old to enjoy them." In the summer of 1890, they made that trip north to Montana, the whole family traveling together. It was John's first time seeing mountains, and he was awestruck by the sheer size of them. Martha loved the cooler weather, and James and Rose enjoyed playing with the ranch dogs that Rob's brothers kept. Rob's brothers, all married now with families of their own, welcomed them warmly. There was a big family gathering where Sarah met everyone, and she was struck by how similar they all were to Rob, good-hearted and hard-working, quick to laugh and generous with their time and affection. They stayed for a month, and Rob showed Sarah the places of his childhood, the creek where he learned to fish, the pasture where he first learned to ride, the barn where he had slept sometimes on summer nights when he wanted to be close to the horses. Sarah understood him better after seeing where he came from, understanding the foundation that had made him the man he was. When they returned to New Mexico, Sarah was pregnant again, though she did not tell anyone except Rob at first. Their fifth child, another boy they named William after Rob's father, was born in February of 1891. The birth was harder than the previous ones, and the doctor told Sarah she should not have any more children. Rob was not upset about stopping at 5. "We have been blessed with 5 healthy, wonderful children," he said. "That is more than enough. I just want you to be healthy and safe." The 1890s brought prosperity to their family. Rob continued to excel as foreman, and Mr. Jackson increasingly relied on him for major decisions. Their own cattle operation was thriving, and they had developed a reputation for breeding quality horses. The children were all healthy and doing well in school, and the house was paid off completely by 1893. Sarah became active in the community, helping to organize social events and fundraisers for the church. She taught a Sunday school class and helped start a lending library in town so that everyone could have access to books. She never forgot what it was like to struggle, and she made sure to quietly help families who were going through hard times, often hiring them for small jobs or paying extra for services so they could keep their pride. In 1895, Mr. Jackson suffered a stroke that left him partially paralyzed. His children had all moved away and had no interest in running the ranch, so he officially made Rob his partner, splitting the ownership of the ranch 50-50. It was an incredibly generous gesture, one that secured Rob and Sarah's future completely. "I have no one else to leave it to," Mr. Jackson said when Rob tried to protest. "And you have earned this 100 times over. You have made this ranch more successful than I ever could have on my own. Let me do this, Rob. Let me ensure that everything I have built will continue after I am gone." Mr. Jackson died peacefully in his sleep in 1897, and his will formally transferred his half of the ranch to Rob. At 34 years old, Rob was now the owner of one of the most successful ranches in the territory. It was a far cry from the drifting cowboy who had asked a struggling woman to darn his socks nearly 20 years earlier. The children grew up strong and capable. John, serious and responsible like his father, took naturally to ranch work and made it clear from a young age that he wanted to continue the family business. Martha was intelligent and curious, always reading and asking questions, and she eventually went to a teacher's college in Santa Fe, determined to educate the next generation. James was the adventurous one, always getting into trouble but never with malicious intent. He loved working with the horses and had a natural gift for training them. Rose was artistic like her mother, spending hours drawing and painting, capturing the beauty of their desert home in watercolors. And young William, the baby of the family, was a mix of all his siblings, adaptable and friendly, getting along with everyone. By 1900, as the new century dawned, Rob and Sarah had been married for nearly 23 years. They were in their early 40s, well established and respected in their community. They had 5 children who were becoming adults and starting to make their own way in the world. One evening, sitting on their porch as they had done countless times over the years, Sarah looked at Rob and felt a surge of overwhelming gratitude. "Do you remember what Mrs. Chen told me when I first started seeing you?" she asked. "What was that?" "She said to watch how you treated others, not just me. She said that would show me your true character." Rob smiled. "And what did you see?" "I saw a man who was kind to everyone, who paid fair prices and tipped generously, who helped people without being asked, who treated everyone from the ranch owner to the stable boy with equal respect." Sarah took his hand. "I saw a man worth loving, worth building a life with. And I have never regretted that decision, not for a single moment." Rob raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "I am the luckiest man alive," he said, "because on a hot day in August I needed my socks darned, and the woman who saved them ended up saving me too." As they sat together watching the stars come out, their children's voices drifting from inside the house where they were playing cards, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought them here. She thought about the desperate young woman she had been, darning socks for coins just to survive one more day. She thought about the kind cowboy who had offered her supper and opened the door to a completely different future. Life had not always been easy. They had faced droughts and difficult winters, sick cattle and broken bones, the normal struggles of raising 5 children and running a ranch. But they had faced everything together, their love growing deeper and stronger with each passing year. In 1902, Martha married a teacher she met at college, and they settled in Santa Fe where they both taught at the same school. John married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring property, and they began building their own house on a piece of land that Rob and Sarah gave them as a wedding present. The family was expanding, roots growing deeper. In 1903, Sarah became a grandmother for the first time when Martha gave birth to a daughter. Holding that tiny baby, Sarah was flooded with memories of holding John for the first time, of the fear and hope and overwhelming love she had felt. Now, watching her daughter experience that same journey, she felt the circle of life completing itself. More grandchildren followed over the years. John and his wife had 3 children in quick succession, and James married and started his own family. Rose moved to Albuquerque to study art formally, though she came home often and eventually married a banker she met there. Even young William, the baby of the family, was courting a nice girl from town by 1908. Rob and Sarah grew older gracefully, their hair graying and their movements slower, but their love for each other never diminishing. They cut back on their workload, letting John take over more of the ranch management, and they spent more time just enjoying each other's company. On their 40th wedding anniversary in 1917, their children threw them a huge celebration. The whole town came, and people stood up to share stories about Rob and Sarah, about their kindness and generosity, about how they had helped so many people over the years. One elderly man, a former ranch hand who had worked for them years ago, stood up and said, "I was down on my luck when I came to work for the O'Briens. I had made some bad choices, and most folks did not want anything to do with me. But Rob gave me a chance, treated me with respect, paid me fair wages. And Sarah made sure I had hot meals and a warm place to sleep. They helped me get back on my feet, and I never forgot that kindness. That is who they are, people who see the best in others and help bring it out." Sarah, sitting beside Rob with tears streaming down her face, squeezed his hand tightly. This was what they had built together, not just a successful ranch or a large family, but a legacy of kindness and compassion. As the years continued to pass, they spent more time looking back than looking forward, reminiscing about their life together. They would sit on their porch in the evenings, just as they always had, and talk about the children and grandchildren, about the ranch, about the changes they had seen in the territory and in the world. "You ever regret it?" Sarah asked one evening when they were both in their late 60s. "Staying here instead of going back to Montana?" "Never," Rob said without hesitation. "Montana was where I came from, but this is home. You are home. You always have been." In 1925, Rob developed a persistent cough that would not go away. The doctor diagnosed him with pneumonia, the same illness that had killed Sarah's father so many years ago. For weeks, Sarah nursed him, sitting by his bedside and reading to him, holding his hand and reminding him of all their memories together. He recovered, though he was weaker afterward, and the doctor warned them that his lungs had been damaged. He needed to take it easy, avoid stress, and stay warm during the winter months. Rob grumbled about being treated like an invalid, but he followed the doctor's orders because Sarah insisted. They had several more good years together, surrounded by family and love. They watched their grandchildren grow up and start having children of their own, making them great-grandparents. They celebrated 50 years of marriage in 1927, an almost unheard-of milestone that was marked with another huge community celebration. In the winter of 1929, Rob caught a cold that quickly turned into another bout of pneumonia. This time, weakened by age and his previous illness, he did not have the strength to fight it off. He died peacefully in his sleep with Sarah holding his hand, 2 months after his 76th birthday. Sarah grieved deeply but without bitterness. They had been granted 51 years together, far more than many couples got, and those years had been full of love and joy and purpose. She knew she had been blessed, and she was grateful for every moment they had shared. She stayed in their house on the land Rob had worked so hard to buy, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She continued to read and draw, to help in the community, to share stories about Rob with anyone who wanted to listen. On a warm August afternoon in 1932, Sarah sat on her porch and watched John's granddaughter, a little girl of 6 named Sarah after her, playing in the yard. The child had brought over a dress with a torn hem, asking if great-grandma Sarah could fix it. As Sarah threaded her needle and began to mend the hem, she smiled. Her hands were gnarled with arthritis now, but they remembered the motions, the careful stitches that would make the garment whole again. She remembered sitting on another porch 54 years ago, darning socks for coins, barely surviving and seeing no future beyond the next meal. She remembered a cowboy with kind eyes stopping to ask about his socks, offering supper in payment. She remembered falling in love, getting married, building a life that exceeded anything she could have imagined in those dark days. Little Sarah, The great-granddaughter watched her work with fascination. "Can you teach me to do that, great-grandma?" she asked. "Of course, sweetheart," Sarah said, guiding the child's small hands. "Always good to know how to mend things. You never know when that skill might change your whole life." Sarah passed away peacefully in her sleep in October of 1934 at the age of 78. Her funeral was attended by what seemed like half the territory, all the people whose lives she and Rob had touched over the decades. She was buried next to Rob, their graves marked with simple stones that bore their names and the dates of their long lives. But their legacy lived on in their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, in the ranch that still bore the O'Brien name, in the countless small kindnesses that rippled out through the community they had helped build, and in the story that was told and retold, of a young woman darning socks for coins and a cowboy who offered to pay with supper, and how that simple transaction became the foundation of a great love story. Years later, John's granddaughter Sarah, the one who had asked her great-grandmother to teach her to mend that torn hem, would tell her own grandchildren about her namesake. She would tell them about resilience and kindness, about how you never know when a simple act of generosity might change someone's entire life. She would tell them that love can bloom in the most unexpected places, and that a good marriage is built on respect and partnership, and choosing each other every single day. And she would always end the story the same way, with words her great-grandmother had told her long ago. "Sometimes the smallest moments lead to the biggest changes. Your great-great-grandmother was darning socks for coins, barely surviving. Then a cowboy said, 'Darn mine, I will pay with supper.' And everything changed. Never underestimate the power of a kind word and a generous heart."